The distant whistle of the train cut through the frigid dawn like a knife, stirring Violet Kelly from the shallow depths of her troubled sleep. Her eyes opened to the same cold reality that had haunted her for weeks: an empty cabin, an emptier heart, and the crushing weight of a mother's worst nightmare. It was February 1882 in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and winter had settled over the healing town with an unforgiving grip, much like grief had settled over Violet's life. She rose slowly from her bed, her fingers instinctively reaching for the empty wooden cradle beside it. 6 weeks had passed since she'd lost her daughter, little Emma, to the fever that had swept through town. 6 weeks since she'd buried her tiny body in the frozen ground. 6 weeks since she'd last prayed to a God she now believed had abandoned her completely. Violet pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and moved to stoke the dying embers in the small stone fireplace. At 24, she'd already endured more than most would in a lifetime. Widowed at 22 when her husband Thomas was killed in a mining accident, she'd managed to carry on for their unborn child. But now, with Emma gone too, there seemed little reason to continue. A knock at the door startled her. Few visitors came to her cabin on the outskirts of town these days. The townspeople meant well but had grown weary of her grief, of her refusal to accept their platitudes about God's will and angels in heaven. She opened the door to find Sheriff Miller, his weathered face solemn beneath his gray mustache. "Mornin', Miss Kelly. Sorry to trouble you so early." "What is it, Sheriff?" Her voice sounded hollow, unused. "There's been some strange reports from folks up near Beaver Lake. Thought you should know, considering," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "considering your situation." Violet's heart quickened. "What reports?" "A couple of travelers claim they saw a woman with a baby heading into the foothills. Described the woman as looking desperate, possibly confused. Said the baby was wrapped in a blue blanket with stars embroidered on it." Her breath caught painfully in her throat. Emma's blanket, the one Violet had painstakingly embroidered during her pregnancy, had disappeared from her home the day after the funeral. She'd assumed it had been taken as a keepsake by one of the women who'd helped prepare Emma's body, though the thought had tormented her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "My Emma is dead. I saw her buried." The sheriff nodded uncomfortably. "I know that, Miss Kelly, and I'm not suggesting otherwise, but with your blanket missing and these strange reports, I thought you should know. People are saying all manner of things." "What things?" Violet demanded, a spark of something besides grief igniting within her for the first time in weeks. "Superstitious nonsense, mostly. Some folks are claiming it might be a changeling situation, that your baby wasn't really buried. Others say it's just a desperate woman who stole your blanket. Most likely explanation is that someone's mistaken or making up tales." Violet's mind raced, despite her rational thought telling her that her daughter was truly gone. But the blanket, how could someone have her blanket? "I'll go to Beaver Lake," she said suddenly, decisively. "Today." The sheriff's eyes widened. "Now, Miss Kelly, that's no journey for a woman alone, especially in your state of mind. The hills are dangerous this time of year, and there's been reports of outlaws. I don't care." She cut him off. "If there's even the slightest possibility, it's a fool's errand," he said gently. "I only came to warn you in case you heard rumors, not to encourage you to chase ghosts." After the sheriff left, Violet moved around her small cabin like a woman possessed, packing provisions, her mind spinning between hope and the certainty that she was being ridiculous. She knew her baby was dead. She had held Emma's cold body, had watched them lower her tiny coffin into the frozen ground. Yet something, desperation, madness, or maternal instinct pushed her forward. By mid-morning, she had saddled her mare and was preparing to leave when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her pause. A rider appeared on the path to her cabin, his tall form silhouetted against the winter sun. As he drew closer, she recognized Owen Bailey, a cowboy who worked at the Carter Ranch several miles outside town. She'd seen him occasionally in town, though they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. He was known as a skilled horseman and tracker, somewhat of a loner but respected for his honest work. "Miss Kelly," he called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. His tall frame was wrapped in a heavy sheepskin coat, dark blonde hair visible beneath his hat. "Sheriff Miller mentioned you might be planning a trip to the foothills." Violet stiffened. "Did he send you to stop me?" "No, madam." Owen's blue eyes held hers steadily. "He mentioned your situation and I offered to help. The terrain up there is treacherous this time of year, especially for someone traveling alone." "I don't need a chaperone, Mr. Bailey." "Not offering to be one," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "But I do know those hills better than most, and I'm offering to help you find what you're looking for." Violet studied him suspiciously. At around 30 years of age, Owen Bailey had a reputation as a competent, straightforward man. Still, his offer surprised her. "Why would you help me?" "You must think I'm chasing a foolish dream." He was quiet for a moment, adjusting the reins in his gloved hands. "When I was 16, my little sister went missing. Everyone said she'd drowned in the river, but with no body found, I searched for months. Eventually, I had to accept she was gone." He paused. "I know what it's like to need answers, Miss Kelly, even if they're not the ones you want to hear." His words landed somewhere deep in Violet's chest, breaking through the armor of her grief. "I know my baby is dead, Mr. Bailey," she said softly. "I'm not delusional, but the blanket. I need to know how someone has her blanket." Owen nodded. "Then I'll help you find both answers about your blanket and maybe something to help with what you've lost of yourself." "My faith, you mean?" Violet's laugh was bitter. "I don't think that's possible." "I wasn't referring to your faith specifically," he said. "But I've seen how losing someone can make a person forget who they are. Sometimes finding answers helps you find yourself again." Something in his steady gaze and the simple honesty of his words made Violet relent. "Very well, Mr. Bailey, I accept your help. We'll leave within the hour," he said. "Pack warm. The hills get colder than the valley and we might be out overnight." As Violet gathered her final provisions, she fought against the dangerous flicker of hope that had ignited within her. Emma was dead, she knew this. But the mystery of the blanket and the reported sighting had awakened something that had been dormant since the funeral: purpose. Whether it led to more heartbreak or some form of closure, at least for the first time in 6 weeks, she had a reason to face the day. By noon, they had left Eureka Springs behind and were climbing into the hills. The winter landscape was stark but beautiful, bare trees etched against the pale sky like black lace. Owen led the way, occasionally glancing back to ensure Violet was managing the increasingly difficult terrain. The travelers who reported the sighting were coming down from Beaver Lake, heading toward the old trapper's cabin near Wolf Creek. Owen explained as they paused to rest the horses. "If someone's been using that cabin, we'll find signs." Violet nodded, grateful for his matter-of-fact approach. He hadn't tried to convince her that her quest was foolish, nor had he encouraged false hope. He simply treated their journey as a search for answers, whatever those might be. "Have you lived in Eureka Springs long?" she asked as they continued riding, realizing she knew little about the man who'd volunteered to help her. "About 5 years. Came here from Colorado after spending time working cattle drives up from Texas." "And your family?" His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes darkened slightly. "Gone now. Parents died of typhoid when I was 18. Sister, as I mentioned, presumed drowned at 14. "I'm sorry," Violet said, recognizing the familiar weight of loss they shared. It was a long time ago. He glanced at her. "The sheriff mentioned you lost your husband before your child." She nodded, the familiar ache of those losses washing over her. "Thomas died in the White River Mining Company collapse 2 years ago. Emma was born 3 months later." She swallowed hard. "She was all I had left of him, of my family. No other relations. My parents are in St. Louis, but we've been estranged since I married Thomas against their wishes. They didn't approve of me marrying a minor." The irony of their concern twisted inside her. "They were right about the dangers, I suppose, but wrong about Thomas. He was a good man." They rode in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own memories as the winter sun moved across the sky. By late afternoon, they had reached the area near Wolf Creek where the sighting had reportedly occurred. "We'll check the trapper's cabin first," Owen said, pointing toward a ridge above the creek. "If someone's been staying there, we'll see smoke." But as they crested the hill, the small log cabin came into view, clearly abandoned. No smoke rose from its chimney, and the path to its door was untouched by recent footprints in the lingering patches of snow. Owen dismounted and approached cautiously, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed Violet, but she ignored him, sliding from her horse to follow. The cabin door creaked open at Owen's touch, revealing a dusty, cold interior. A quick search confirmed what was already obvious: no one had been there for some time. Disappointment settled heavily on Violet's shoulders. "Perhaps the travelers were mistaken," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps," Owen agreed, but his eyes were scanning the floor carefully. "But someone's been in this area recently." He pointed to the hearth. "Those ashes have been disturbed within the last few days." He moved to the small table beside the lone window and picked something up. "And this wasn't left by trappers." Violet's heart stuttered as she saw what he held: a small scrap of blue fabric with the edge of an embroidered star visible. "Emma's blanket," she whispered, taking it with trembling fingers. "But who would have brought it here? And why only a piece?" Owen's expression was grim. "I don't know, but this confirms someone was here recently. Let me check around outside before it gets dark." Violet sat on the single wooden chair, clutching the scrap of fabric, her mind racing with possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. She knew Emma was dead. She had to be. Yet the evidence of her blanket being here in this remote cabin was undeniable. When Owen returned, his face was tight with concern. "There are tracks heading further up the ridge. Looks like a woman's boot prints, smaller than yours, alongside what could be a child's. But they're at least 2 days old, partially obscured by yesterday's light snow." "We need to follow them," Violet said immediately, rising to her feet. Owen shook his head. "Not now. It'll be dark within the hour, and following tracks in the dark is a fool's errand. We'll stay here tonight and set out at first light." Though every part of her wanted to protest, Violet knew he was right. They worked together to make the cabin habitable for the night, Owen gathering wood for a fire while Violet cleared away the worst of the dust and debris. As darkness fell, they sat on opposite sides of the small fire, the dancing flames illuminating their faces. Violet stared into the fire, the scrap of blue fabric still clutched in her hand. "Who would take a dead baby's blanket?" she asked quietly. "And why leave a piece of it here?" Owen considered the question seriously. "There are people who take mementos from graves, though it's not something decent folks talk about much. But the reports of a woman with a baby, that doesn't make sense." "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "Unless—" "Unless what?" Violet looked up sharply. Owen hesitated. "I don't want to give you false hope, Miss Kelly, but I've heard stories of babies being sold or taken. It's rare, but it happens." The implication stole Violet's breath. You think someone took Emma before she died, replaced her with another child. Even as she said it, she knew how desperate and unlikely it sounded. I think we need to find whoever has that blanket and get answers, Owen said carefully. Nothing more, nothing less. They fell silent again, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the small cabin. Finally, Owen spoke again. You mentioned losing your faith, he said. After my sister disappeared, I struggled with the same. Couldn't understand why God would let a young girl vanish without a trace. Violet looked at him across the flames. Did you find it again? Your faith? He poked at the fire thoughtfully. Not in the same way. I found something different, a belief that even when things don't make sense, there's still good worth fighting for. That helping others through their darkness helps light my own way. Is that why you're helping me? To light your own way? A small smile crossed his face. Maybe partly, but mostly because no one should have to search for answers alone. His simple honesty touched something in Violet that had been numb for weeks. For the first time since Emma's death, she felt a connection to another person that wasn't clouded by their pity or her resentment of their intact lives and families. Thank you, she said softly, for not treating me like I'm broken beyond repair. We're all broken in some way, Miss Kelly. It's what we do with the pieces that matters. As they settled in for the night, Violet on the small cot while Owen spread his bedroll near the fire, she felt a strange sense of calm despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. Whatever they found tomorrow, whether it was a cruelly fabricated tale, a thief with a disturbing penchant for morbid keepsakes, or something she couldn't even imagine, at least she was doing something other than drowning in grief. And somehow, the solid presence of Owen Bailey made the burden lighter than it had been in weeks. Morning came with a thin layer of new snow and a biting wind that promised more to come. They set out early, following the faint tracks Owen had discovered the previous day. The trail led them higher into the hills, away from the creeks and established paths. Whoever left these tracks wasn't concerned with ease of travel, Owen observed as they picked their way through a rocky section. They were looking to avoid being followed. By midday, the tracks had led them to a narrow valley between two ridges. A thin stream of smoke was visible rising from the trees ahead. Someone's there, Violet said, her voice tight with anticipation and fear. Owen nodded. We'll approach carefully. Stay behind me. They dismounted and secured their horses, then continued on foot. As they drew closer, a small cabin came into view, nestled against the hillside and nearly hidden by pine trees. Unlike the trapper's cabin, this one showed clear signs of habitation, fresh wood stacked by the door, animal skins stretched on frames to dry, and the smoke that had drawn them curling from a stone chimney. Owen motioned for Violet to stay back as he approached. Before he could reach the door, it swung open and a woman appeared, a rifle in her hands. That's far enough, she called, her voice sharp with warning. State your business or turn around. Owen raised his hand slowly. We're not looking for trouble, madam, just seeking information. The woman was middle-aged, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and a face weathered by years of outdoor living. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted Violet standing behind Owen. What kind of information? Violet stepped forward, ignoring Owen's warning glance. My baby's blanket, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. A piece of it was found in the trapper's cabin down the ridge. It was taken after my daughter died 6 weeks ago. Something flickered across the woman's face, recognition, guilt, or fear. Violet couldn't tell which. I don't know anything about any blanket, the woman said, but her grip on the rifle tightened. Please, Violet pressed. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want to understand why someone would take it and how it ended up here in the hills. The standoff continued for several tense moments before the woman lowered her rifle slightly. "You'd better come inside," she said finally. "A storm's brewing, and this isn't a conversation for the open air." The interior of the cabin was warm and surprisingly well kept. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and herbs hung from the rafters. A small table and chairs occupied one corner, while a curtain partitioned off what Violet assumed was a sleeping area. But what caught her attention immediately was a cradle near the fire, a wooden cradle with a blue blanket visible inside. Emma's blanket. Violet's knees nearly gave way. Owen steadied her with a hand on her arm, his other hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "Where did you get that?" Violet whispered, staring at the cradle. The woman set her rifle aside but remained standing between them and the cradle. "My name is Martha Sims," she said instead of answering. "I'm a midwife and healer. Have been for 30 years, Mrs. Sims," Owen said, his voice firm but respectful. "We'd appreciate an explanation about the blanket." Martha's eyes remained on Violet. "Your baby, the one you said died, what was wrong with her?" The question caught Violet off guard. "She had a fever. Many children in town were sick, but Emma. She was so small, so young, she couldn't fight it." The pain of those memories made her voice crack. "And you're certain she died?" Martha pressed. "Of course I'm certain," Violet replied, anger flaring through her grief. "I held her body, I buried her." Martha nodded slowly, then moved to the curtained area and pulled it aside. On a small bed lay a young woman, pale and clearly unwell, though she appeared to be sleeping. Beside her, nestled in a makeshift crib fashioned from a drawer, was a baby, a newborn with wispy dark hair, sleeping peacefully. "This is my niece, Sarah," Martha explained. "She came to me 3 weeks ago in labor and terribly afraid. The baby's father abandoned her when he learned she was with child, and her parents threatened to disown her if she didn't give the baby up." "But what does this have to do with Emma's blanket?" Violet asked, confused. Martha sighed heavily. "Sarah delivered safely, but the journey here in her condition weakened her. She's been fighting a fever ever since." She glanced at the sleeping mother and child. "When she was delirious with fever, she became convinced her baby would be taken from her. She kept talking about a beautiful blanket she'd seen in town, one with stars that would protect her child." Understanding began to dawn on Violet. "She stole Emma's blanket from my home after the funeral." Martha nodded. "I believe so, though she never admitted it directly. By the time I realized what she had done, she was too ill for me to return it. The blanket became a fixation for her. She believes it keeps her child safe." Violet approached the sleeping pair cautiously. The baby was beautiful, perfect, wrapped in Emma's carefully embroidered blanket. The sight of it, the blanket that should have been buried with her daughter, brought a fresh wave of grief. "Why leave a piece at the trapper's cabin?" Owen asked, still watching Martha carefully. "I didn't," Martha replied. "Sarah stayed there briefly on her way to me. She may have torn a piece off accidentally. That cabin's full of nails and rough edges." The explanation made sense, but it did nothing to ease the hollow ache in Violet's chest. The mystery was solved, but the resolution brought no peace, only confirmation that Emma was truly gone, and that her precious blanket had been taken by a desperate young mother for her own child. As if sensing Violet's thoughts, Martha spoke again, her voice gentler. "I know this isn't what you hoped to find, Mrs. Kelly. I'm sorry for your loss, truly." Violet couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded, turning away from the sleeping baby and its blue star blanket. "The storm's getting worse," Owen observed, glancing out the small window where snow was now falling heavily. "We should start back before the trail becomes impassable." Martha shook her head. "Too late for that. Look at those clouds. This is no squall, it's a proper blizzard coming in. You'll have to wait it out here." The thought of spending hours, possibly days, in this cabin with the constant reminder of what she'd lost, was almost unbearable to Violet. But Owen was already assessing the situation pragmatically, checking the window again and nodding in agreement with Martha's assessment. "We have supplies with our horses," he said. "I'll bring them in and make sure they're sheltered as best I can." While Owen went to tend to the horses, Martha busied herself preparing a meal, leaving Violet standing awkwardly in the middle of the cabin, trying not to look at the cradle or the sleeping mother and child behind the curtain. "You can sit," Martha said finally, gesturing to the table. "I don't bite." Violet sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Why didn't you come to town to return the blanket once you realized it was stolen?" Martha measured coffee into a pot before answering. "I considered it. But Sarah's condition was fragile, and the blanket brought her comfort. I planned to return it once she recovered." She paused. "And truthfully, I wasn't sure how it would be received. A blanket taken from a dead child's home, it seemed better to wait until emotions had cooled." Before Violet could respond, the baby behind the curtain began to fuss. Martha moved to check on them, and Violet heard her speaking softly to Sarah, who appeared to have awakened. Owen returned, bringing in their saddlebags and stamping snow from his boots. "Storm's settling in for certain," he reported. "Horses are as protected as I can make them, but we won't be traveling until it passes." By evening, the storm had intensified into a full blizzard. Wind howled around the cabin, finding every crack and seam. The 4 adults and baby were confined to the small space, creating an uncomfortable intimacy among strangers bound by unusual circumstances. Sarah, still weak but alert, had apologized tearfully for taking the blanket. "I saw it when they brought flowers to your home after the funeral," she explained. "It was so beautiful, and I had nothing for my baby. In my state of mind, it seemed like a sign, like your baby's spirit was offering protection to mine." Her pale face crumpled. "I know now how wrong that was. How painful for you." Violet found she couldn't sustain anger toward the young woman, despite the pain her actions had caused. There was something in Sarah's desperate love for her child that resonated with Violet's own grief. "You should keep it," Violet said finally, surprising even herself. "Emma has no use for it now, and your baby does." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't, please," Violet said. "Let it protect your child as it couldn't protect mine." That night, as wind battered the cabin and snow piled against its walls, Violet lay awake on a pallet near the fire, listening to the occasional soft sounds of the baby. Owen was nearby, his breathing steady in sleep, while Martha and Sarah occupied the small bedroom. The tears came silently, rolling down her temples into her hair. She had known, rationally, that finding Emma's blanket wouldn't bring her daughter back. Yet some small, irrational part of her had hoped for a miracle that, through some impossible circumstance, the reports of a woman with a baby wrapped in Emma's blanket might lead to her child, alive and waiting to be found. "You're awake," Owen's voice came softly through the darkness. Violet quickly wiped away her tears. "The wind is loud," she said, offering a practical excuse. He was quiet for a moment. "It was a kind thing you did, letting her keep the blanket." "It wasn't kindness," Violet admitted. "It was selfish. I couldn't bear to look at it knowing Emma would never use it again." "I don't believe that," Owen said. "I think you recognized another mother's need and put it above your own pain. That's the definition of kindness." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. For the first time in weeks, Violet felt something other than grief or numbness, a small spark of connection, of human warmth. "What will happen to them?" she asked, referring to Sarah and her baby. "Martha seems capable," Owen replied, "and determined to protect them." I suspect they'll stay here until Sarah is strong enough to travel, then perhaps move somewhere new where her circumstances won't be held against her or the child. It's not fair, Violet murmured, that a mother who wants her child might be forced to hide or give it up, while I, who would give anything to have mine back, am left with nothing. No, Owen agreed. It's not fair. Little in this world is. They fell silent again, listening to the storm rage outside. Then Owen spoke again, his voice gentle in the darkness. When we return to town, what will you do? The question caught Violet unprepared. Before this journey, she'd had no plans beyond surviving each day, moving through grief like wading through molasses. Now, having confronted the finality of Emma's death and the reality that no miracle would bring her back, she faced the stark question of how to continue living. I don't know, she admitted. I've been existing, not living, since Emma died. Before that, everything I did was for her, to provide for her, to give her a good life despite losing her father. Perhaps it's time to find something to do for yourself, Owen suggested. Not to replace what you've lost, but to honor it by living fully again. The thought was both terrifying and strangely appealing. I'm not sure I remember how to do that, Violet confessed. You took this journey, Owen pointed out. You faced the unknown, followed a difficult trail, all to find answers. That takes courage. The same courage can lead you forward now. Violet considered his words, finding unexpected comfort in them. And you, Mr. Bailey, what drives you forward since your losses? In the faint glow from the banked fire, she saw him shift slightly. For a long time, it was just habit, the next job, the next trail. But these past years, I've found purpose in being useful, in knowing the skills I can help others when needed. Like helping a grieving mother chase ghosts through the hills. There was no bitterness in her tone, only genuine gratitude. Exactly like that, he replied with a softness that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the landscape transformed under a blanket of pristine snow. The world outside the cabin was blindingly white, hushed and beautiful in its winter wrapping. Martha prepared a simple breakfast while Sarah nursed her baby, who Owen learned was named Daniel. The child was healthy and strong, with a good appetite and bright eyes that followed movement around the cabin. Watching Sarah with Daniel brought both pain and an unexpected sense of peace to Violet. The love between mother and child was palpable, sacred in its simple completeness. It reminded her of what she'd shared with Emma, however briefly, a love that existed independently of time, that couldn't be erased even by death. As they prepared to leave, Sarah approached Violet, Daniel bundled in Emma's blanket. I'll tell him about this blanket when he's older, she promised. About the baby girl it was made for and her mother who let him have it even though it hurt. Violet reached out hesitantly, touching Daniel's soft cheek. Tell him it was made with love, and that's why it will protect him. The journey back to Eureka Springs was slow but peaceful, the fresh snow making the familiar landscape seem new and unexplored. Owen and Violet rode side by side when the trail permitted, talking occasionally but often just existing together in companionable silence. Thank you, Violet said as they crested the final hill before town came into view. For coming with me. For treating my quest with respect, even when it might have seemed foolish. It wasn't foolish to seek answers, Owen replied, and I'm glad you found them even if they weren't what you hoped for. Not what I hoped, Violet agreed, but perhaps what I needed. She looked ahead to the town nestled in the valley, smoke rising from chimneys, life continuing as it always had. I think I needed to confirm that Emma is truly gone, that no miracle will bring her back before I could consider how to move forward. And have you considered it? Moving forward? Violet nodded slowly. I have some ideas, Before I married Thomas, I trained as a teacher. Perhaps the school could use assistance. Or Dr. Morgan mentioned once that his wife has been looking for help organizing medical supplies at the clinic. Owen smiled, genuine warmth in his eyes. Both sound like worthy pursuits. As they approached the outskirts of town, Owen hesitated. "Miss Kelly Violet, would you permit me to call on you, perhaps join you for dinner one evening this week?" The question surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Something had shifted between them during their journey, a connection formed through shared purpose and mutual respect. "I'd like that," she said simply, and was rewarded with a smile that made her heart beat a little faster. In the weeks that followed, Violet slowly re-engaged with life in Eureka Springs. She began assisting at Dr. Morgan's clinic 3 days a week, finding unexpected satisfaction in being useful to others in need. The work was sometimes difficult, bringing her face to face with illness similar to what had taken Emma, but it also offered perspective and purpose that had been missing. Owen called on her regularly, initially for dinner or afternoon walks, later bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflowers he'd found on his rides, a carved wooden bird that he'd made himself during evening hours at the ranch bunkhouse. Their relationship developed gradually, built on mutual respect and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. Owen never tried to minimize Violet's grief or suggest that her loss could be replaced or forgotten. Instead, he simply walked beside her as she learned to carry it differently as a part of herself rather than the whole of her identity. Spring came to the Ozarks, bringing renewed life to the hills around Eureka Springs. The famous healing springs that gave the town its name and purpose flowed more vigorously with the snowmelt, bringing visitors seeking cures for various ailments. One warm April evening, Owen took Violet riding to a hilltop overlooking the town and surrounding valleys. Wildflowers were beginning to carpet the meadows, and the trees were budding with new leaves. "I wanted to show you something," he said as they dismounted. He led her to a particular spot where a young oak sapling had been recently planted. Around its base, blue star-shaped flowers were beginning to bloom. "What is this?" Violet asked, kneeling to touch the delicate petals. "Blue star flowers," Owen explained. "Martha gave me the seeds when we left. They're rare in these parts, but she thought they might grow here. I planted them for Emma." Violet's eyes filled with tears, not of grief this time, but of profound gratitude. "You planted them for a child you never knew." "I planted them for her mother, whom I've come to care for deeply." Owen knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Violet, I know your heart will always hold a special place for Thomas and Emma. I would never ask to replace that love or those memories." "But," she prompted, her heart pounding, "but I've come to love you, and I hope there might be room in your heart for new love alongside the old." The sincerity in his eyes and voice touched her deeply. Over the past months, Owen had become essential to her healing, not by trying to fix her grief, but by helping her find ways to live with it, to honor it while still embracing life. "There is," she whispered. "There is room, Owen. You've helped me find my way back to myself, back to a life with purpose and even joy. I love you for that, and for the man you are." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the hills. He leaned forward, kissing her gently, a promise of companionship and love that asked nothing in return except what she was willing to give. When they parted, Violet looked again at the little sapling and the blue star flowers. "This is perfect," she said softly. "A living memorial that will grow and bloom year after year." "Like faith," Owen observed. "It doesn't disappear when winter comes. It just goes quiet, waiting for the right conditions to grow again." Violet considered his words. Her relationship with faith had changed in the months since Emma's death. The angry rejection of God and religion had softened into something more complex, a recognition that belief didn't guarantee protection from life's cruelties, but could provide a framework for finding meaning within them. "I'm not sure my faith will ever be what it was," she admitted, "but I'm finding my way to something new, a belief that love continues beyond loss, that meaning can be found even in grief." "That sounds like faith to me," Owen said. "Not the kind that promises easy answers or miracle cures, but the kind that helps you stand up when life knocks you down." They stayed on the hilltop until sunset, planning their future together while honoring the past that had shaped them both. Violet knew there would still be difficult days ahead, anniversaries, memories, moments when grief would resurface unexpectedly. But she no longer feared those days would drown her. By summer, Violet had moved from her small cabin to a modest house closer to town that she and Owen purchased together after their small, intimate wedding in May. The ceremony, held in the town's chapel, was attended by friends they'd made in Eureka Springs, including Dr. Morgan and his wife, Sheriff Miller, and several of Owen's colleagues from the ranch. Notably absent were Violet's parents from St. Louis, who had responded to her wedding announcement with a cool letter expressing doubts about her decision to remarry so soon after her losses. Their continued judgment stung, but Violet found she could bear it more easily with Owen's support and the new community she'd built around herself. Their home became a place of healing and new beginnings. Owen continued his work at the Carter Ranch, but was saving to purchase land of their own where they could eventually build a life independent of others' employment. Violet divided her time between assisting at Dr. Morgan's clinic and teaching reading to children whose families couldn't afford the town school. In late summer, Violet received an unexpected letter from Martha Sims. Sarah and baby Daniel were thriving in their new home in Missouri, where Sarah had found work as a seamstress. The Blue Star blanket remained Daniel's most treasured possession, and Sarah had begun teaching other young women the embroidery techniques she'd admired in Violet's work. The letter included a small package seeds for more Blue Star flowers and a tiny embroidered pillow with Daniel's footprint stitched on one side and Emma's name on the other. The accompanying note explained that Sarah wanted Violet to have this token of connection between their children, one living, one remembered, but both loved beyond measure. That evening, sitting on the porch of their home as twilight settled over Eureka Springs, Violet showed Owen the gift. "It's beautiful," he said, tracing the embroidered name with his finger. "A thoughtful gesture." "It is," Violet agreed. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined accepting such a thing, a reminder of what I've lost connected to someone else's living child, but now it feels right somehow. Like Emma's memory is helping another child, and that gives her short life additional meaning." Owen put his arm around her shoulders. "You've come a long way." "We both have," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "When you found me, I was a woman who had lost her baby and her faith, determined to chase an impossible hope into the hills. And I was a man going through the motions of living without much purpose beyond the next day's work," Owen added. "I think we found each other at exactly the right time." Violet smiled, remembering his words from that first day, his promise to help her find what she had lost. He had kept that promise, though not in the way either of them had anticipated. Emma remained gone, but through the journey to accept that reality, Violet had found a new faith not in religious certainties or miraculous interventions, but in the healing power of love, community, and meaningful work. The following spring brought an unexpected blessing. As the Blue Star flowers bloomed again around Emma's oak tree, now noticeably taller and stronger, Violet confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was expecting a child. Owen's joy was tempered with concern for how Violet might feel about this new pregnancy. "Are you happy about this?" he asked carefully after she shared the news. "I know it might bring up difficult memories." Violet placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Terrified, actually. But yes, I'm happy too. Emma will always be my first child, and this baby won't replace her. But I've learned that love multiplies rather than divides. There's room in my heart for all of you." As her pregnancy progressed, Violet found herself navigating complex emotions. Joy about the new life growing within her existed alongside renewed grief for Emma and fears about potential complications or loss. Owen remained steadfast in his support, never minimizing her concerns or suggesting she should simply focus on the positive. Dr. Morgan provided excellent medical care, taking special precautions given Violet's history. The women of Eureka Springs rallied around her as well, particularly those who had experienced similar losses and understood the mixture of hope and fear that accompanied pregnancy after loss. In December 1883, almost 2 years after Emma's death, Violet gave birth to a healthy son whom they named James Thomas Bailey, honoring both Owen's father and Violet's first husband. James had Owen's blue eyes and a full head of dark hair like his mother. Holding her newborn son, Violet experienced a bittersweet joy, profound gratitude for this new life alongside the inevitable thoughts of Emma, who would never meet her little brother. Owen sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Violet, creating a circle of love and protection. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, touching James's tiny hand with a finger that the baby immediately grasped. "He is," Violet agreed. "And he has quite a story to inherit about his sister Emma, about a blue star blanket that travels with another baby, about how his parents found each other while searching for something else entirely. A story about loss and finding," Owen added. "About how sometimes when you lose your way, the journey to find it leads to unexpected treasures." As winter turned to spring once more, Violet took baby James to visit Emma's oak tree. Now almost 10 feet tall, the young tree stood strong against the Arkansas winds, its branches beginning to spread wide enough to create patches of shade. The blue star flowers carpeted the ground around its trunk, their color reminiscent of the blanket that had started their journey. Sitting beneath the tree with James cradled in her arms, Violet felt a sense of completion, not because her grief for Emma had ended, but because she had found a way to carry that grief while still embracing joy, love, and new beginnings. Owen joined them, bringing a small picnic lunch. As they ate together in the dappled shade of Emma's growing oak, Violet reflected on the strange, painful, beautiful path that had brought them to this moment. "When the sheriff came to my door that day with reports of a baby in the hills," she said, "I never imagined where that journey would lead." "To answers, though not the ones you sought," Owen replied, "and to love, though not the kind I expected to find again." She smiled at him over James's sleeping form. "When you promised to help me find what I'd lost, my baby and my faith, did you really believe it was possible?" Owen considered the question carefully. "I believed you needed to seek answers, whether or not you found them, and I believed that in the seeking you might find something else worth having." He reached for her hand. "I never expected to find my own heart in the process." "We found a different kind of faith," Violet said softly. "Not the unquestioning kind I had before Emma died, but something stronger because it's been tested." She looked down at James, then up at the oak tree rustling in the spring breeze. "Faith that love continues beyond loss. That new beginnings can coexist with honored endings. That helping others through their darkness truly does light our own way." "And we found family," Owen added, his voice warm with gratitude. "Different from what either of us imagined, shaped by what we've lost and what we've found together." As afternoon sunlight filtered through the young oak's leaves, casting patterns of light and shadow across their small family, Violet felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. Emma would always be missing from their circle, her absence an enduring ache in Violet's heart. But that absence had led Violet to Owen, to James, to the woman and mother she had become stronger, more compassionate, more aware of the precious fragility of life and love. The blue star flowers nodded in the gentle breeze, their beauty a reminder of loss transformed into memory, of grief carried forward with honor, of faith rediscovered in unexpected places. And in that moment, surrounded by the visible signs of growth and renewal, Violet knew with certainty that she had indeed found what she had set out to seek, not in the way she had imagined, but in the way she had needed most. "I love you," she told Owen, the simple words carrying the weight of their shared journey. "And I love you," he replied, his eyes reflecting the depth of that truth. "Today, tomorrow, always." Together, they gathered up their son and their picnic, heading back toward the home they had created, a sanctuary built not on the absence of pain, but on the presence of love strong enough to encompass both sorrow and joy, endings and beginnings, what was lost and what was found. As Eureka Springs disappeared behind them, and their home came into view, Violet thought of Martha's cabin in the hills, of Sarah and Daniel with their blue star blanket, of Emma's memory living on through connections and compassion. She thought of the long journey from desperate grief to hard-won peace, and of the cowboy who had walked beside her every step of the way. In the years that followed, their family grew. A daughter joined them 2 years after James. Amelia Grace Bailey, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's gentle spirit. Later came another son, William, completing their family of 5 or 6, as they always included Emma in their count, her memory an integral part of their family story. Owen eventually purchased land outside town, where he raised horses, building a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far as St. Louis and Kansas City. Violet continued her work at the clinic and expanded her teaching to include a small school for children from families who worked in the surrounding hills. Each spring, they added more blue star flowers to the growing grove around Emma's oak tree, which eventually became tall enough for James to climb, then Amelia, then William. The children grew up understanding that they had a sister in heaven, that grief and joy could coexist, that faith came in many forms. Violet's parents eventually reconciled with their daughter, initially through cautious letters after James's birth, later through an actual visit that broke years of silence. Though their relationship remained complicated, the healing that began that day continued gradually over time, particularly as they formed bonds with their grandchildren. On the 10th anniversary of Emma's death, the family held a special remembrance beneath her oak tree, now tall and strong with a trunk thick enough that it took James and Owen together to reach around it. Friends and neighbors joined them, many bringing blue flowers to add to those already blooming. Dr. Morgan, now retired but still a dear friend, spoke about how Violet's work at the clinic had helped countless mothers and children over the years. Sheriff Miller, his hair now completely gray, recalled the day he'd brought news of the strange reports that had sent Violet and Owen into the hills on their fateful journey. When it was Violet's turn to speak, she looked around at the gathering, her children healthy and growing, Owen steady beside her, friends who had supported her through the darkest days of her grief. She thought of Emma, whose brief life had altered Violet's path in profound and ultimately beautiful ways. 10 years ago, I lost my baby and my faith, she said simply. I thought both were gone forever. But a kind cowboy promised to help me find them, and though the journey wasn't what either of us expected, his promise came true in ways I couldn't have imagined. She reached for Owen's hand, drawing strength from his touch as she continued. I didn't find Emma alive as I desperately hoped, but I found ways to keep her memory alive through love and service to others. I didn't reclaim the simple faith I'd lost, but discovered a deeper one built on compassion, community, and the courage to love even knowing loss is possible. Looking at her children gathered around Emma's oak, Violet felt the fullness of her heart, the enduring ache of Emma's absence, woven inextricably with the profound gratitude for all she'd found along the way. And most unexpectedly, she concluded, her eyes meeting Owen's with a lifetime of understanding passing between them. I found a love that helped me carry my grief rather than escape it, that honored my past while building our future, that reminded me daily that a heart broken open has more room for love to enter. Later that evening, after the gathering had dispersed and the children were asleep, Violet and Owen sat together on the porch of their home, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. You ever wonder what might have happened if the sheriff hadn't come that day with those reports? Violet asked. If we hadn't gone searching for Emma's blanket? Owen considered the question thoughtfully. I like to think we would have found each other somehow, he said, but the journey might have been different, longer perhaps. I'm grateful it happened as it did, Violet said softly. Even with all the pain, all the false hope and disappointment, that journey changed me, helped me find my way back to life when I thought I was finished with living. Owen squeezed her hand gently. You helped me too, you know. Before you, I was just existing, doing my work, moving through days without real purpose. You reminded me what it means to live with an open heart. Above them, stars illuminated the Arkansas sky, the same stars embroidered on a blue blanket that had led them on an unexpected journey of loss and discovery. The same stars that now decorated the grove around Emma's oak, blooming each spring as a reminder that beauty could emerge from sorrow, that endings contained the seeds of beginnings, that what seemed lost could sometimes be found in entirely unexpected ways. Thank you, Violet whispered to Owen, to the stars, to the unseen forces that had guided their paths together, for helping me find both.